Today, we speak with Dr. Cornelis Hoogesteger, a Dutch homeopath who has been living and working in Mexico for 35 years. As you all know, part of my mission with this podcast is to bring you homeopaths from around the world to connect us all in a global mission of creating a homeopathic revolution. It's been quite hard to find an English-speaking homeopath in Mexico, so I am so grateful to Cornelis for coming on the show and sharing with us a bit about the homeopathic scene in Mexico, as well as his experience over the past 35 years. Thanks so much for listening.
Welcome to the Homeopathy Hangout, where we discuss all things homeopathy from around the world. And now my mum and your host, Eugenie Kruger.
Hello, homies, and a very warm welcome to Homeopathy Hangout. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Cornelis Hoogesteger, a Dutch homeopath living in Mexico. How amazing is that? Welcome to the show, Cornelis.
Well, thank you very much for your invitation, and let's make the best of it.
It's really, really lovely to have you on. You have to tell our listeners how on earth, well, firstly, how were you introduced to homeopathy? And what is a Dutchman doing in Mexico?
Well, Dutchmen also at times follow their wives. And my wife, she was Dutch-Mexican. She was born in Mexico from Dutch Swiss parents. And we met in Holland. And I always was interested to do some kind of development work, right? Not so much to stay in Holland. And so the fact that she was from Mexico and that she also was interested in doing especially educational work on community level. So in part that brought us together and that brought us to Mexico.
Oh, and how were you first introduced to homeopathy? I know in Holland, homeopathy is quite well known, but what was your first introduction to homeopathy?
Well, not so much introduction. As a child, I saw some medical offices that said homeopathy, and I didn't have the slightest idea. And I also saw other offices that says women's diseases, and I thought, women's diseases? Why have women special diseases? But then during my medical studies in Amsterdam, there was some class in homeopathy that I visited, I think, only once. And there were only like 10 of the 250 students. And it didn't appeal very much to me. I think the professor was talking about pulsatilla. I recall something about blue eyes and blonde hair. And anyway, I didn't go that much to classes because I was very active as a student activist, to say so. But during my studies as a medical student, I stopped twice because I had a main crisis, because I didn't understand it. I loved to study physiology and all that kind of stuff, but came into crisis when it was about pathology and diseases and treating things. And so I had my internship, and already after the first weeks of the first internship, I had to leave. I had a kind of nervous breakdown because I didn't understand it. And so I stopped twice, and then I thought, okay, what I'm going to do, I got back into medicine again. And I was walking around more or less as an alien, like looking everywhere on what is this and what is that. And I was a bit frightened and terrified. And so I was very glad that I could go to work in Mexico in something like community medicine. And there I worked with herbal medicine and with a very small amount of essential medicines, more or less 20 or so, that I taught to health promoters. And that was my first job in Mexico. And so after about 7 years, the Dutch government, I got support for my projects from the Dutch government. And they said, well, if you want to go on in this kind of work, you will have to do a master's degree in public health. I'm talking about the 80s, right? Because I went right after graduating with medicine, I went to Mexico. And then I thought it very much, do I go back to Holland? Do I want to do something in public health? Or do I want to stay here? And then I decided to stay in Mexico and to do private medicine, something I never had thought I would do. But I thought, okay, I will do eclectic medicine. And I had some interest in homeopathy. I had some peeps, I seen some things. But when I read the first book on homeopathy by Kent, his lectures on homeopathic philosophy, I was completely lost, and I found more or less all my answers. And then I bought also Vitulka's book, The Science of Homeopathy. And then I said, nothing about eclectic medicine. This is what I'm going to do 200%. And so that's how I got into homeopathy.
That's very cool. And what is the state of homeopathy like in Mexico? From my understanding, is it pretty easily available? Do most people know what it is? Do you need to be a medical doctor to practice homeopathy, or can lay people practice?
Well, there is a long history. Homeopathy was introduced here already in the 1850s from Cuba, and it was officially recognized in, I think, 1895, because then it was still the time of Porfirio Diaz. He was a dictator. He started in a very good way, like many dictators, and he was very oriented to friends, and he loved homeopathy. And then also the first homeopathic school was founded in Mexico, the National School of Homeopathy, and it is still working. And here in San Miguel de Allende, it's a colonial town in the middle of Mexico, we have what they say is the very first homeopathic clinic in Mexico that was here in the 1870s.
Wow, the 1870s.
Well, it was not really a hospital. It was like a house. I think maybe they had 15 beds or so. But it's still announced here to the tourists, this was the first homeopathic hospital in Mexico. And since then, it has been growing a lot from the national school that was also connected to the main Mexican university. There was another school separating in 1925. The free homeopathic school. And to make a long history short, in 1965, there was another separation, what made the postgraduate college of Homeopatía de México. But that's still going on. And the other schools also are still going on. And well, Mexico is a huge country, right? It is more or less the same size as the whole of Europe. Mm. And so we have now a lot of schools in Guadalajara, that's the other main city, and in Monterrey. And there are now a lot of online courses. But the schools in Monterrey, that's also like a superior homeopathic school or so, they request that you are an MD, the same as the school where I went, postgraduate. But there are in Guadalajara several schools and courses online that don't request that you are an MD, and it's what they call here a licenciatura. So you get a license, a kind of diploma, right? And they can work in that state. And I don't know whether they are licensed also to work now in other states. But there is quite separation between the doctors and the licensed people, and I'm somewhere in the middle. Yeah, most of my colleagues don't want to mix up with the people who have a license, but I see that many people who have a license do a better work than the doctors, right? Definitely. Not all. And in general, homeopathy in Mexico is like complex homeopathy, right? So polypharmacy. And homeopathy is very popular. You will find in the most towns, even towns of 20,000 people, you will find homeopathic pharmacy, right? And some doctor, there are, well, when I started like 35 years ago, there were like 5,000 doctors, of which 95% practices polypharmacy. And now I think it easily has doubled.
Really? That's amazing.
Uh-huh.
That's very interesting because I had Dr. Aizayaga in Argentina on the show, and he was saying that homeopathy is actually really struggling over there at the moment. But it sounds like it's certainly thriving in Mexico from what you're saying.
Yeah, it's definitely thriving. Like in Guadalajara, there are 3 courses online and also in the university. There's one group that is called Pure Homeopath, and they work together with Erik van Woensel. I don't know whether you know him. He wrote with Vitulkas the book on levels of homeopathy.
Okay, levels of health.
And levels of health. And the last 3 or 4 years, also this year, they have a seminar with Farag Master.
Yeah. Oh, amazing.
On cancer and other topics. So they definitely promote a higher class of homeopathy. I see that not all students really comply with that. I am with many of them in a homeopathic WhatsApp group, and I see a lot of questions that show that they don't have a very high level, right? I mean, often a question, what do I give for this condition, or what do I give for that condition? But there is a great variety, to tell you.
That's amazing. So that clinic, that homeopathic clinic or hospital, that's still going today. And is there just the one, or is there more than one that you know of?
No, there is a homeopathic hospital in Mexico City. And there they don't apply pure homeopathy, right? There's generally a struggle between a classical homeopath and the homeopaths of the National School of Homeopathy, who are more oriented toward polypharmacy. But here in San Miguel, there is not a clinic anymore.
So, Cornelis, can you tell us a little bit about your own practice over the last 35 odd years? I know you said you've done a lot with midwives as well. So what was it that drove you to specialize in that sort of area? And what has your practice looked like over all these decades?
Well, first about the midwives, we have had the first recognized professional midwifery school in Mexico that started more or less when I started to work here too. And that's where I started to give a homeopathic course to the midwives in training. That was a course of, I think, about 50 hours. And that included the use of about 50 remedies. And we used, maybe you are not familiar with it, translation of the book Homeopathic Childbirth Manual by Betty Idarius.
Idarius, yes. That was one of the books that was recommended to me. Yeah.
That is from 1996, and that was translated by an excellent midwife. She is an American, Patricia Kay, and she was a midwife here for about 10 years. She also helped to deliver one of my children when I had too long a time of not having done any delivery. Mm-hmm. So I asked her to help. And yes, we have trained here 17 generations of midwives. And I think that was a total of about 400 or maybe 500 midwives who started. But generally already after the first 3 months of the first year, 1/3 had dropped out. And generally only 1/3 finally graduated. And in total, the school has trained a total of a bit over 100 midwives. And unfortunately, a lot of them have not been working very much for a very long time. But I think probably still about 60 are working and are keeping up the flame of midwifery here in Mexico. And some in Guadalajara, they are even setting up their own professional midwifery school now. And they are very close to getting recognition. And happily, that's one of the best students also who was always very interested in homeopathy. She told me also that she is interested in getting me on the team to give some courses.
That's very exciting. I think midwifery is one of those jobs where it should be almost compulsory to learn homeopathy, because you can just prevent so much unnecessary interventions if you use homeopathy.
It's absolutely wonderful. Yeah.
It really is.
A problem is that most of the midwives, if they use homeopathy, they use it too much in a routinely way, right? Of all those 50 remedies that they should know, maybe they use 10 and then only as routine thing, right? At times some pulsatilla, arnica, maybe califosphorica for exhaustion and that kind of things, but at least it's something.
I was about to say, even if they just use those and nothing else, that's definitely going to help anyway. So how did you get involved with the midwifery side of things? What was it that drew you to that?
Well, the midwifery school was a part of what is CASA. It was a center for adolescents here in San Miguel Allende. And when I started to work here in San Miguel Allende, I didn't fill up my time yet with my own patients. And so I went to that school where they also had medical services and even laboratory and dentist services. And so I started to work there. And so that's how I enrolled also in the midwifery question.
Oh, that's lovely. And it must have been so wonderful teaching homeopathy for you as well. Do you have a preference for consulting or teaching, or do you like both?
I like both, but unfortunately the teaching only has been in the midwifery school. I would have loved to have taught also homeopathic students, but we don't have any college or school here close, ni modo, like we say in Mexican.
So talk to me a little bit about what sort of things you see in your practice. Are you still practicing at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. I'm very busy. And I came a bit earlier here to set everything up and not to be disturbed by patients, but I still see in my office like 6 patients a day. And for the rest of the day, from early in the morning till late at night, I'm busy in WhatsApp and with calls and checking cases and studying. And so I'm still very busy. Yes.
That is absolutely incredible. And there's so many homeopaths that have been practicing for 30, 40 years and they just keep going. I mean, I was interviewing Jill Turland a little while ago and she is 80. She turned 80 in November. She's still seeing her clients. And I mean, George Vathulkas is 90 now. I don't know if he's still seeing clients, but he's certainly still lecturing at 90 from what I believe. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And I heard your podcast about with Moskowitz.
Yeah.
He must also be in his 80s. I understand.
I think he's 84. Yeah, he's not practicing anymore, but yeah, that's pretty impressive. Yeah. What sort of cases, what sort of illnesses and things do you see and what sort of things do you treat in your clinic? Is there any particular illnesses that you see in Mexico that maybe is not so prevalent in other places?
I don't think so. In spite of that, I'm a foreigner. A lot of people think that I am a homeopathy for foreigners because you have a big foreign community, over 10,000 people, mostly Americans. And a lot of people think that I am for foreigners, but the foreigners are only like 5% of my patients. And I'm very happy that that is the case. So I see especially also a lot of people from the countryside, from the little hamlets and so on. And I see a lot of, to say so, poor people and a lot of people from the middle class. And I see everything. A third of my practice are children under 5. But lately I see more elderly people over 60 because a lot of the people, let's say the poorer people, they have now what is called a kind of social security, right? They have free services in the hospital. And generally, it is very lousy services and always the same routine, antibiotics and anti-inflammatory and Tylenol and so on. But anyway, that has pulled a lot of patients away from me. But I still see a lot of that kind of routine problems. I see a lot of gynecological problems, definitely, and a lot of, let's say, emotional problems. And for me, and I think that's the same for most of us, it's very satisfying to be able to attend the emotional problems of people who do not come for it. You know, they come for a headache, they come for other things, never should or never would go to a psychologist or so. And here's the doctor who is asking all those questions. And yes, we have a lot of problems, a lot of broken families. A lot of people are migrant workers. The daddies are up north in the United States, often for years, because often they are there illegally. So a lot of broken families. In spite of that, they have a lot of contact, but often they start there another family or The children never see their daddy. I see a lot of, call it, women, single mothers, right? Because it's too common that when a girl gets pregnant, as soon as she announces that she's pregnant, the boy does leave her. And if not right away, then maybe later. And so a lot of incomplete families, and a lot of Natrum Moriaticum and other remedies that are the most common remedies needed for those situations.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it must be so hard. It's such a different lifestyle to over here in Perth, I would say. There's actually some same, but we have a lot of what they call FIFO families, so fly in, fly out. So a lot of the dads here work in the mines. So they will fly 2 weeks at the mines, 2 weeks back. So we treat a lot of that as well, but there's certainly not the poverty. I think there's too much money over here. That's part of a lot of the problem over here. But certainly that when the families are broken, you don't have that cohesiveness. The kids certainly pay for that. Hey? And that's
here what we often see is that as soon as they get married, or not married, but as soon as there is a child, the man looks for a job, and then finally he goes to the north, and many are illegal. So you stay there, and you stay there maybe for 5 years to get a lot of money together, and then to go back and build your house. And yes, it causes a lot of problems. Definitely.
Yeah, it's very hard. Hey? Have you got some advice for our newer homeopaths? You've got more than 3 decades behind you now. What are some main advice that you would give to our younger homeopaths on how they can ensure that they have a multi-decade practice one day?
Especially to start younger than I did. I started when I was 40. And I'm a bit jealous of the young lads, to say so, who start studying homeopathy when they are 20 or 25, right? Definitely. And for the rest, I don't know, to get a good school. And unfortunately, my school was not that excellent, but I was blessed that I had a good domination of English. And so I studied, and that has helped me a lot. And now it's difficult. I see there are so many courses online, and everybody is shouting, I have the best thing, the best course and the best book. And because I get emails, and especially, mainly emails. And at times I turn them off because I get tired of seeing all the courses, and every day there is something new. But I think there are excellent opportunities also, right? I started with a very limited amount of books, right? Because the big boom started somewhere in 95 or in 2000, right? And I had to make a major shift, because I thought, okay, I study materia medica, and then I look a bit more at Vitulcas, and I learn the materia medica, and to get used to the different pictures as if they are my friends. But then came Jan Scholten with his whole new system that I'm not used to. It's a bit difficult to to teach new tricks to all dogs, right?
Yeah.
And I've been reading Scholten since 95, but I still don't really know it very well.
Yeah.
And then also Rajan Sankaran with his whole system. And I've been reading it all. And so I tried to use it all, to integrate it. But I would have loved to do a better job on that.
And I tell you what, this podcast has been a blessing and a curse, because I have been in touch with so many amazing homeopaths all around the world, but everyone is doing something different. And so half the time my head is just spinning, and I'm like, okay, what's the best way to go? So I use like a little bit of everything, and I kind of have my own style in the end of all the different techniques that I use. But it can be definitely overwhelming. And I feel that we're in the middle of a really big boom at the moment, because it feels like there's even more courses out at the moment. There's so many courses out. And
I found very interesting your interview with Harry van der Zee.
Yes, I know. How incredible.
About the PC resonance and so on. And then I thought, I have that book. I bought it a couple of years ago, but I didn't know very well what to do with it. So I put it aside. It didn't look very practical to me. But now I was looking everywhere because I have a whole bunch of books. And finally I found it and I started to read it. And I tried already to get some of those remedies.
Is that the Peter Staffel book or is that a different one?
It is Homeopathy for Diseases.
Oh, okay.
It's very interesting to read. I can recommend it very much.
Oh.
Their point of view, very interesting. And yes, we have a lot of problems asking about specific Mexican problems. So much diabetes and so much obesity. I think Mexico is the country with the most diabetes and the most obesity, right? And at times, and it sounds terrible, I feel I should put a sign on my door, please no more diabetes patients, because at times I really almost want to cry of the things that you see. People with amputations, people with renal insufficiency, and so many more problems. And the people, I think one of the reasons is that the people eat so much junk food and drink so many, you call it beverages, sugar. It's incredible. And even the diabetes patients generally go on with that. It's very difficult that the people comply with a diet. And so I see that in many people, the last stages of diabetes, and maybe those resonances that say promote can help in it. Because often the best homeopathic treatment and the individualized treatment is too late or doesn't do much in those states anymore.
Yeah, that's pretty rough. If you've had a limb amputated just because of diabetes, I mean, you would think that would be enough of a wake-up call to make dietary changes. But I think it's just so, sugar is so addictive and that lifestyle is so addictive that it's often takes even more than having a limb amputated to actually get people to change their way, hey?
So I have a lot of work in educating those people because I cannot simply give a homeopathic remedy, but I talk a lot about diet and I also prescribe vitamins and so on, but it's difficult, yeah.
You can lead a horse to water, hey, but you can't force it to drink.
That's right. But for me, it's okay. I mean, so many people talk about doctors getting angry with them. And I tell them a doctor never should get angry with a patient, right? And should never scold the patient. It sounds very bad, but if you get out here and you drink a Coca-Cola here on the corner, that's not my business, right? And you are welcome to come back. And I will repeat that better you don't drink that Coca-Cola, right? But
that's a beautiful mindset that you have, because I have had some clients that have told me they've gone to doctors or even other natural therapists. I actually had somebody email me this week to say they went to a homeopath and the homeopath was like scolding them for getting their child vaccinated. And I'm like, well, it's not really our business if somebody decides to make that health decision. All we can do is just stand there and be there and help them and support them. And like, we know how bad all these things are for them, but that's not our job is to educate, but we have to always be that sympathetic person that they can go to, that they know is their safe place, and that we can give them advice. And whatever they do with that, that's up to them. That's their own journey. It's not up to us to enforce that on them. Yeah.
I see a lot of anxiety in people, very frequent. And you know what happens with all the people? If they go to the normal doctors, they are looking for a word. And then they say, normal doctor, yes. And I say, I am the crazy one. But I'm so glad that we as homeopaths can keep people out of the hands of all those doctors, because people often say, oh, I come here for a miracle. I said, yes, okay, let's try to do it. But at times, and I think that happens to all of us, we are really amazed about what kind of miracles at times we are able to achieve, right? And that with just some simple remedies, we can prevent people from a whole bunch of terrible problems when they get into the hospital and in the whole machine. And as long as I'm able to offer something much better than allopathic medicine and the whole medical pharmaceutical industry, I think I feel very realized in what I'm doing, because I see so many disasters, about amputation. I recall a patient, he had 2,000 milligrams of glucose in his urine, and he had always more than 200 in his blood. And he had a terrible infection. Half of his foot was already amputated, and that was terribly infected. It looked nauseous, right? And he had a lot of forming bacteria in his lower leg and so on. And his mother didn't want him to have another amputation. And so just the day before he was going for another amputation, he came to me and he said, sure, we give it a try. And with the homeopathic remedy and with all the care of his mother to take care of his wounds, in less than 3 months, every part was covered with beautiful skin, right? His whole foot. Well, first his foot was like 3/4 was just pus and looking very ugly. And what is maybe the main thing is that that guy had so much progress, let's say, spiritually, mentally, right? Because his wife left him, right? Because she couldn't go on with him anymore. He was a very difficult and tough guy. And he improved so much under the care of his mother and under homeopathic care. Unfortunately, within a year, he died finally because he had a terrible renal insufficiency also that was not curable anymore. But for me, that's the most satisfying, not so much saving lives at all cost, right? But saving, let's say, the soul. I mean, the person. And at times I tell my colleagues also, try to be humble, right? We cannot change the karma of the people. And we cannot say, okay, he should get cured, right? You should be able to accept the deaths of your patients and that things don't go exactly the way you want. But anyway, you can achieve a lot. Maybe you have also experience with patients in the last phases and have seen what some pills of arsenicum can do, right? To help the person to accept his death and to die quietly when all the family thinks, oh, wow, he's getting better, right? And probably he will die in a couple of days, but now he's quiet, he's not anxious anymore. And all the energy goes to where it has to go, to the mind, right? While the body, like an old car, is falling away, right? That's the beautiful homeopathic death, to say so.
Oh, Cornelis, that was really lovely. I'm so glad that you finished us off on that, because homeopathy really doesn't matter what's going on, whether it's an infected foot or end stage of life or birth. Homeopathy is there for every aspect of our lives to help and support us, which is just so amazing. Just this morning, actually, my throat was so sore. I thought I would have to cancel all 6 of my interviews today, but I had a dose of the staph strep nosode, and within, I'd say, maybe about 15 minutes or so, I just felt that all melt away and everything was feeling so much better. And I just think, I don't know what I would have done with homeopathy. I mean, clearly my body's telling me I need to go and have a rest, which I will go and do after this interview, and I've got more tonight. But it's always there to support us. Doesn't matter what stage of life we're at. It's just there, just waiting for us.
Well, it's
reach out.
It's beautiful. I mean, you must have had those experiences, but I've seen babies, that have been crying for 3 months, right? And I give them the right remedy. And it really happened that before I can close the bottle again, the baby is asleep.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the same with acute pains, right? And acute ear pain and all that kind of things. And yes, I'm so happy that I can do these things, right? I myself come from a poor family, and I hated to see people sick, right? Because sick people do not react normally, right? They are moaning and groaning and they are complaining. And I hated to see sick people. And look what I'm doing daily, seeing sick people. But I'm so glad that I really find it like such an enormous blessing that I found homeopathy. And that I didn't go on. No, I think I would have quit medicine definitely if I would have gone on with allopathic medicine. I see all those poor doctors bored with the same routine prescriptions, always an antibiotic, something for pain, and an anti-inflammatory. And I think one of the most satisfying situations is, and I had it again today, young patients who never have had the opportunity to build up their defense system, because from the very first infection in their life, they got all the medicines, right? And now they are 2 or 3 and they are having terrible respiratory problems. They go to the emergency room every 2 or 3 weeks and they are on inhalers and sprays and on cortisone and all that kind of things. And literally, generally, I wipe all those things from the table into the dustbin. And generally, I give them lycopodium, right? Because it's typical lycopodium children, right? And I have seen so often that the parents or the grandparents come back and they said, finally, he started to have a life. And we too, right? Anyway, you have to check every patient, all the different details, but it's so great to see all those things. And that keeps me, moving daily.
Absolutely. I often think it must be very depressing being a medical doctor or even a specialist and having cases in front of you and saying to a client, there's nothing I can do for you. Because literally I have in my decade of practice, I've never said that to a client ever. I've never said to them, there's nothing I can do for you. Sure, if your arm has been amputated, homeopathy is not going to make your arm grow back, but I can give you Ignatia to help with the grief or whatever else. Like there's always something we can do with homeopathy. We will never tell you, sorry, there's nothing I can do. You know, like I think it must be depressing being in a job where that's something that you're saying to people on a daily basis. Sorry, there's nothing more I can do for you. I've already tried all the drugs. There's nothing else I can do for you. That must be really horrible. I think
and
it's as a job.
It's very frustrating to see. At the beginning of my career, I still had some fear and respect for all the ologists, all the gynecologists and other ologists. But now I generally say, look, those specialists, as they are people who know a lot about nothing and nothing about most other things, right? And I think they have their place, but they should work in a team or so, because we see crazy things that because they are with a specialist and the specialist has a very narrow-minded look at the patient, right? And so patients get in terrible treatments and in the whole diagnostic machine, and they spend a lot of money, and it's terrible, right? And these days, there are people who are very specialized and are causing major problem to a lot of people. Lately, I saw a boy of about 15, and I don't know what he had anymore, but he had a tiny deviation in his blood work, right? And it was a super specialist who said, oh, that can mean that you have this and that. And so they went on for 2 years to check the boy and to limit his diet and to limit his activities and checking again. And then they came to me and he was bored with it and the parents were bored and they were so relieved that I said, forget about it, right? I mean, if he has a problem, that should show up. I mean, not only in the blood work, but in symptoms. And since your son doesn't have any symptoms, forget about it, right? But now preventive medicine, I mean, it's another business now. It's another business model, right? The same with the vaccination. It's something terrible. Yesterday, I saw a boy of 8 years old with ulcerative colitis. I think it was because of the COVID vaccination, because I think it's quite exceptional for a boy of 8 years to have strong ulcerative colitis. And so I see a lot of that kind of problems.
Well, that has now come out in the Pfizer report. There was actually an incredible podcast with Joe Rogan and Robert Kennedy that came out a couple of weeks ago. And he did actually say in there that ulcerative colitis is one of the known side effects of the Pfizer vaccine specifically. So it is right in the reports. And we're going to be seeing a lot of that. But you're right.
And there is no doctor who ever thinks about it, or he stays shut about it maybe. I've seen people with other problems, typically related to the vaccines and more now to the COVID vaccines. And I asked the patient, did other doctors ask you? I mean, patients who have been hospitalized and who have seen a lot of specialists, and they say they never asked me, and they never told me that it might have been because of the vaccination.
Well, the doctors are not even allowed to ask that anyway. They'd lose their license if they ever questioned the holy grail of vaccination. Heaven forbid somebody should question that. It's fine for us to question, antihypertensives or cholesterol medication or asthma medication, but goodness knows, don't question vaccination. Oh my gosh. It's a crazy world we live in. Cornelis, I was just thinking to myself, we say "van die os op die jas" in Afrikaans. That means from the ox to the wagon. Oh no, from the ox to the jacket. That means when you're jumping from one topic to the other. We already have so many homeopathy books out there that is continually, I feel like a crow with shiny things everywhere with all these books. But then I was thinking, you are fluent in Dutch and Spanish and English. So there's even more homeopathy books available to you that you can read. At least I can't read the Dutch and the Spanish books, but you have access to all of that as well.
But the most that I read is English, right? I think that is 90%. And Dutch, I have some Dutch, but I never have read them really, I guess. But lectures on homeopathy by Kent, I read it twice or 3 times in Spanish and maybe 3 times in English, and it's all underlined. And
is that your favorite book?
Well, it used to be, right? Because that was a great book and the only book that went a bit more deep, and it also, I found it very interesting. And
definitely have a Kent's lectures sitting here somewhere. I see it right now. Well, Cornelis, it was really wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge with our listeners. I really appreciate it. I have been trying for such a long time to find a homeopath in Mexico to come and chat with me. I know you said you didn't feel qualified to come on because you're actually Dutch living in Mexico. But like I said to you, I cannot find a English-speaking Mexican homeopath. So you are as good as it gets. And I am so grateful to have you on the show. And I really appreciate your time today. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. And again, I will try to provide you with some Mexican doctors who can answer you in English.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, well, for us, it's nighttime. We are going to bed now.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All the best. Bye-bye.